Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us for tonight's program featuring artist Jane Gilmor. The installation Breakfast on Pluto is on view through February 6, 2022 in the Katz Gallery. My name is Vanessa Figge. I'm the assistant curator, and I have the absolute pleasure of working with Jane on this exhibition. Just so you know, next week's program will be a virtual program featuring the city's Joshua Johnson, curator of the exhibition Dimensional 3D Works from the Figge collection. You can register for that program online. It's virtual and will begin at 6:30 p.m. Central. We are able to offer these Thursday programs at no cost to you, thanks to the generous sponsorship provided by Chris and Mary Rayburn. Chris and Mary for that and for everything that you do. We are grateful. Thank you. While these programs are free, I encourage you to consider becoming a Figge member. Your support is vital to the museum now more than ever. For those of you watching virtually and ready to visit Figge in person, we recommend that you check out Figge's website, which has information on our policies, such as the requirement to wear masks while in the museum. After Jane's talk, there will be a brief Q&A, and then we will transition into the gallery space. So now a little bit about Jane. For over 5 decades, Jane Gilmor has explored, poked, and prodded the human condition in an impressive body of work ranging from performance pieces to site-specific installations. In her deftly humorous work, she engages with social and cultural issues, including gender stereotypes and social inequities. Gilmor has exhibited extensively throughout the U.S. and abroad. She attended Iowa State University and the University of Iowa and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She was a foundational figure in the women's art movement of the 1970s and is an Emerita Professor of Art at Mount Mercy University, where she taught for nearly 40 years. She maintains her studio in Cedar Rapids. Through tireless experimentation and constant reworking, Gilmor's work continues to change and evolve. Breakfast on Pluto features recent sculptures with layers of personal and cultural meaning that Gilmor created using found materials and repurposed artwork mined from the recesses of her studios. Recent events, including the pandemic, societal unrest, and environmental instability, have seeped into her practice, as they have into all aspects of our lives. And while she weaves stories by bringing these objects together, her artwork also encourages us as viewers to make our own meaning as we interact with them. They compel us to examine each of their elements and in turn to examine ourselves. We are honored to exhibit your work at the Figge and to share it with our community. And now let's give another warm welcome to Jane Gilmor.
Thanks, Vanessa. It was my pleasure. She is a collaborator as much as a director and incredible visual eye, and she can do anything. Operate one of those scissors. But I want to, before I start, first I had to take off my shoes, and then I just want to thank some people. It's been a real treat to be able to show at the Figge and to have that wonderful space for those pieces that only fit in my studio one at a time. and so I just want to thank Michelle Hargrave, the director of the museum, and a couple of real visionaries, Andrew Wallace, who was the director of exhibitions, and Vanessa Sage, who is this is the curator. So gifted, they're both so gifted at what they did. Everyone here is so gifted. I also had lots of help from Joshua Johnson and from a registrar, and also from Steve. And all the education department is phenomenal. I'll show you a few slides, but not slides, I'm sorry, digital images. But there's a public project that they're carrying on in conjunction with my show, which is really going to be phenomenal. And my collaborator, Terry Rasky, who's helping build it, and Shims Veneer, Rod Bradley, who I don't think is still here, but they helped on that project, and the education department just took it from one workshop that I did and really transformed it. So that's going to be a really fantastic. So once the Day of the Dead once they're dead, you can see this large structure through that doorway, and it's about 12 feet high, I think. So it'll be great. So I also want to thank a few people in education, like Laura Wright, Brian Allen, and Melissa. Melissa is on camera here. I also really want to thank Joyce Burley. Joyce Burley wrote a book about my work called I'll Be Back for the Cat, which came out about 9 years ago now. And she wrote the longer essay, and Vanessa wrote an essay for the catalog, which is not out yet, but will be. And I'm going to be quoting Joy, like she could say it a lot better than I can in several instances. So thanks very much. And also thanks, everyone here is a friend of mine. I'm afraid this is going to be like old news to a lot of people. How many times have you seen the All-American Glad Cake Ketchup? Here it comes again. I think also I want to thank my landlords, Lejeune and David Chatham.
We love you.
Well, I wouldn't have any work here if it weren't for them. So, and all of my collaborators, like Marshall Beckelman is going to be in a few of these pictures, Kathy Pizzabellis, Nancy Nadakis, Chuck and Ellen Barth, Ellen's, the janitor at their school did the boat out there, the magic boat. Don and Janice Jones donated there's all kinds of signs there, Tamise, Jane, Chris, everybody. So, and Nate, is Nate here? Matt is here. Two other collaborators. Well, Matt Butler is like my long-term collaborator, former student who does lots with me for me on video and sound and so forth. And so you can thank him for that moaning video out there, driving everyone behind it in those offices crazy. Okay, so I'm just gonna, Vanessa said, try and make like one half history and one half the new work. So I'm just gonna go through the history of lots of pictures. And then if you have questions later, or you can just stop me and say, what was that? My best quote so far is I had the show almost up and this great woman went by and went, I don't know what it is, but it really looks great. That has been my motivating factor ever since. So the song that you just heard is from the 60s. And if you're watching online, you saw a video of this guy with a one-man band. He was quite famous for this song and some other things, particularly in Ireland. It was during the time of the Troubles. And it's this song about how we can all be armchair tourists and, a very good time. We can go out in outer space and see everything. We can go to the moon and we can have breakfast on Pluto. We can do whatever we want in our imaginations. And this later became the title of a film, which was from a novel by Patrick O'Neill, I think. And it was about a young trans Northern Irish youth and his sort of fantasy life in the face of living a very harsh reality. It's a great film. And if you're a Peaky Blinders fan, it's Cillian Murphy. Yay! And big fan. So anyway, that I will recommend that film. But also, I think the film really has many themes like what I'm trying to do in this show. There's kind of no black and white. And right now, everything obviously is quite fluid, but it always is, isn't it? So things are never what we expect them to be, and the future is complicated. I just want to show a little personal history. Here's my grandmother, who Kristen will be happy to hear. My grandmother, I spent my childhood visiting her in Amarillo, Texas. Here she is doing her 1918, I think, famous Amarillo Highway performative drawings. on her motorcycle. This is my mother. There's a theme of cats kind of runs through here. This is her cat, and then the fur on her body, which, and she wasn't an artist, she was a biologist, but she took lots of art classes at the University of Colorado, and she was a terrific artist. My father, not so much, but well, my mother claimed that George O'Keeffe taught at her high school, and she did, but not at the same time that my mother was there. My father claimed Grant Wood taught at his middle school, which he did, but I think, but Mel would know, but I don't think it was the same time my father was there. But this is my father, and this is a great drawing that he attempted to do, which feels very Grant Wood-like. But the best part is the backside. He used to come home, and his cat used to jump on his shoulder and ride up the driveway with him. And he tried to draw the cat on his shoulder, but he just couldn't get it right, so he just drew a horse instead. That was my father. And my sister, also very gifted in visual arts. This is from, actually she became a writer, but you can see why. This is from Girl Scouts, the Girl Scout motto, and she had to glue those little alphabet soup things on one at a time. It's some skill involved. And this is how I got my start. If Joy's listening, she'll remember this story because she later sent me, I told this story and she sent me a Fred Flintstone teaching. But in sixth grade, we wore these things called blast jackets. They're like fishing jackets. And I did and people would draw on there. So I drew my favorite cartoon character other than Rocky and Bullwinkle was Fred Flintstone. So Fred Flintstone on the back. And everyone said, "Oh my God, you're such a good artist. You should really be an artist." and so I decided to be one. And I found that after my parents died, we were cleaning out the house. It's like the worst drawing. I mean, it's so tentative and unimaginative, and it's terrible. It's terrible, but it is, it shows you what determination will do. This was my first major award, honorable mention in the annual, I think my mother wrote the essay, Annual Safety Patrol Contest. And the title is Why School Safety Patrol Members Should Be Stationed at Dangerous Intersections. Brilliant. And there's my grandmother explaining to me why maybe I should consider a career in law enforcement. This is, so anyway, I was in high school, I took art, but then it was very practical, so, and all my friends went to Iowa State, so I went to Iowa State, and I decided to be a fashion designer. Iowa State's really the place to go if you can be a fashion designer. I mean, it is probably now, but it wasn't then. And it was in the home ec department, so I had to take a lot of courses in home management and so forth. And this is my unfortunate applied art applied art 2 project, where I did the interior design for my parents that built the house, and I did it. And they actually used the carpeting and everything I picked. And for 40 years, it looked just like that. But then after I graduated, I ran off to Chicago, and I went to the Art Institute at night, and during the day I worked for these mafia affiliated gum surgeons. I was their bookkeeper, which was the only deed that I got in college. And but I discovered I was there at the right time, which is the whole story of my life. I'm always in the right place at the right time by accident, and often miss the fact. It's like when I saw a show about the summer of love in San Francisco, and I'm looking at in the 70s, and I'm looking at the show, and then I thought, now wait, I was in San Francisco that summer. I didn't know it was the summer of love. So I often miss the main point. But these are some of the people I was exposed to, kind of outsider, untrained artists like Joseph Yoakum and Jim Nutt. This really changed. They were all not going to school then, but showing their work at a group called the Harry Who. And it just changed me. It was much more, it was more, narrative for one thing. And at the same time, of course, I still like cats, and I really loved the All Iowa Fair and other fairs where they had the quote unquote freak shows. And I went back to school at Iowa. I decided I would get certified to teach because, what else would I do? And I studied with Lasansky, who was a very famous but very conservative printmaker. And this was one of the prints I did. I really got in a lot of trouble for that. It was way too cute. You don't use cats in images in Lasansky's workshop. And so these are some of the prints I did. We worked huge. Some days it was $300 just for the paper. But I really, I do see a lingering impact of that printmaking MA that I did at that time. Now, I'm skipping forward a little bit, but I'm going to come back to how I got here. But in 1976, well, I was back at Iowa in 71 and got certified to teach and got a master's in printmaking. And then I got a job before I had an MFA, and so I went back to school at Iowa and in painting. Luckily, Byron Burford was there, so the fact that I was making clothes for my cat as my paintings, he took it well. So in the back, I saw in the back of the kitty litter bag in 1976 the 11th annual All-American Glamour Kitty pageant, and you could send a poem and 100 words or less on why your cat should win. And since I'm already making clothes for my cats, which was they were not quite so literal, but so I sent a photo of her in her square dancing dress and 100 words, a really bad poem. And I was first they interviewed me on the phone, and I was like, I had to pretend like I was a good game show contestant, like, oh yes, I love it. And I was one of 9 finalists flown to Miami Beach for the finals of the Olympic at the Hotel Continental, which couldn't have been more perfect. And they picked each of the 9 cats up in a mousemobile, which was it was the car of the truly Nolan Exterminating Company, and they had mouse ears and tails. But this is a great story. So 2003, I'm teaching in Portugal, and I'm sitting on one of the main streets, and I look up, and there's a mousemobile. Truly Nolan had extended to Europe, and it had mousemobiles. So I hadn't seen one since Miami Beach in 1976. So picked this up. The mayor met us. Miss Miami Beach. We had hors d'oeuvres for the cats. There was a poolside fashion show. This was a nun from upstate New York, and she dressed up like Pocahontas, and her cat was Davy Crockett. They only dressed up for the fashion show. I was the only one who really regularly dressed up my cat. But it was all you were really considered weird if you did this in the 70s. I mean, my mother's neighbors were like, oh, I saw your daughter on television. She tried to explain, but it most definitely, I had to play it really straight because I was thinking of it as a real statement about the roles of women in culture, analogies between women and animals, and also just lots of cultural issues that I wanted to deal with. And so I played it very straight, and the people that were doing it were advertising people, and so they really, wanted everything. I had some of the first video equipment, which was portable. It was the size of this thing. It's terrible. I don't know if Frank was going to come, but he came with me and ran the video equipment. So anyway, we had all these festivities. There's her princess outfit. My cat was Miss Kitty Glitter, but everyone kept calling her Kitty Glitter. Front page of the Gazette, which, picture beat out, I think, the pending missile crisis, Cuban Missile Crisis, and a few other things. Brown versus the Board of Education, second. And Kitty in her corn dress, she had stuffed corn cobs and a bright wood painting done in corn kernels on the top. This was the winner. They wanted a cat to look really ordinary, look like somebody dripped ink down his face. And so, and the winner, the woman who owned the winner, was so intense on winning that she threw her back out, so her husband had to come in and take over at the last minute. This is your go-go outfit. You don't know what go-go is, you should look it up. And I had a big show at Coe College, and I had a catalog, and I found this mask, this French mask, and I adapted it. And then from then on, I used it a lot as a kind of a symbol of the female archetype as a strong creative force, sort of a tech goddess woman. I used it in a lot of performances, including Nancy Figge is in one coming up in Greece. In fact, no, she's not in this one. So this is later, but when in the 86, I think, when I was living in New York, I did this one because it was the first terrorism, and it was in Israel, I think, and I did one of terrorist pity on the Manhattan Bridge because I was living by all these ruins on the Lower East Side. And I just happened to cross, I was in New York for 9/11, and I saw the towers go down, and it was within a mile or so. And I came back home and I was going through stuff, and I found this image, which was really, startling, to say the least. Now, I was very lucky, again, in the right place at the right time. Marilyn Dorinda and John Herbert were at the University of Iowa, and Hans Brader was there, and Barton Perfect was one of the influence. But just in 1 year, there was so much money from the arts right then, from the Kennedy Center and other places. And just in 1 year, these are the people that were there. And I don't know if you're an art person, you recognize lots of them. But in particular, a critic like Lucille Hard came around, and they really talked about the women's art movement. And they took slides from everyone, and then they went out to other places and showed their slides with other people's slides. And so it created this whole network, which was outside sort of internal workings of New York City, and really exposed a whole lot of people in the Midwest and elsewhere to the rest of the country. All these people came and spoke. We were in performances with them. Sherry Buckler was a great art historian. Some of the things, the women's art movement, I won't get on my soapbox, but they really had a big influence on me, and also that movement, which is kind of second wave feminism from the 70s. But also, they influenced the art world in general, I think. And Jude Chicago and Mary Shapiro were at Cal Arts, and they did something called Woman House. Somebody donated a house, and they had these consciousness raising groups, and women talk about their own experiences. This was a kind of minimalism, not okay to use personal experiences in your work, and really not okay. And it was also a time when you only could make art like what was the current, what was happening in New York. And so the women's art movement really encouraged using your own experiences, sort of saying, like, your experiences are different than other people's. Women's experiences may be different than men's. I'm not so sure that's necessarily true, but the criticism, the discussion of it really was quite interesting. And so they took individual rooms, and this is the eggs to breakfast kitchen, but this is an original photo, so you really can't see the transition, but the eggs gradually become breasts. And I started working with, and this is the time I met Jane Gilmor, who was in the Women's Caucus for Art in Iowa City. And they brought in Mary Shapiro, and they were working a lot in, quote unquote, they made us very aware of women's work, textiles, works of quote unquote secondary arts, because they were mostly done by women. And so I started I was in painting, but I started painting on raw canvas and then stuffing the edges, and this one on the right is about the camera cake patch. It's called Caught in the Crossfire. I think I had just gotten a job at Mount Mercy, which sounded like a very religious school, wasn't really, but the little embroidered applique piece was also an effort I already had a background in sewing because I was 5'10" when I was in 5th grade, so I had to make clothes. So everybody in our family was tall and make things. It also made us very aware of kind of a history of mythology about women, but also lost women artists from the past, renewed interest in besides in content, just in a history that had been virtually lost because most historians were men. So this is Ana Mendieta, who was a good friend of mine. We worked together in the graduate department with Hans Breger in the multimedia department, which was now what we call intermedia, I guess. And this is sort of a political gesture, became this gesture of the Minoan snake eyes, which was Cycladic snake goddesses, which were they were considered or thought to be very peaceful civilization and had a matrilineal based culture. So you can see that gesture being used again and again. When to Mary Beth Elson, I'm right, and mine always looked a little tentative, like because I often felt awkward, and I also like to question the myths that are being constructed in a given situation. So mine are kind of like, yes, I think I'm a goddess, but and this is one by Mary Beth Elson about a memorial for all the women burned as witches. Also, the idea that gender, race, ethnicity are cultural constructions. That it's not necessarily biologically determined, and that art can be used to make social comment and bring about social change. So this is Suzanne Lacey. She did a piece about the Los Angeles Strangler, and because it was getting no media attention, and they tracked all of the murders on television, and she really was savvy in using media and getting publicity. And it was a really important initial kind of performative piece. And this is another piece on the left that's is about whisper waves of women. It's about women in it's older women, and it was in California, and they met for about a year every Sunday, talked about their own experiences, and then they performed all in white on the beach, and their discussions were overhead in a sound, so people would hear up above. Sorry. And Nancy, you're here. Nancy was one of several students who went with me to Greece, and I think the lower right, Nancy's in there, which and I took students in classes in January term. We had a January term 1 month, and we could go somewhere. So we went to Greece, and I don't think that was a summer one, but it was like 6 weeks. And we started reclaiming some of these patriarchal sites. The lower one with Nancy is Delphi, and the other one is the Temple of Olympia and Zeus. I also did a bunch of videos there, which were kind of like hot cross buns. Or this one's about getting an idea. When you have an idea, you hit your head like a light goes off, and this is like hitting your head over and over and over again. And that was Dennis Jennings in there. When I was in Greece, along the side of the road, they had great shrines, which you see more now, but at the time I'd never seen them before. They were jailed for people who were killed in car accidents, and they would build a shrine there that was a shelter for their soul, and people would tend it and bring food and candles to light to the afterlife. And this is a really powerful one because the one on the top left, because it was a child and all of the clothes had been dyed red and hung around trees around it. So, some of them were just so powerful, and some of them were just so interesting because the architecture was based on nearby structures, nearby churches, local churches. And also inside, they had these metal votives. They call them tomas, but they can be called, they're like ex-photos. No, they're not like ex-photos. They're like milagros in Mexico. And, I think meanwhile, back at Mount Mercy, hidden behind all the vines, I realized that we had this incredible grotto. It was much like a grotto at West Bend, only a much smaller version. And it was built by this eccentric guy who said, asked the nuns what they wanted, and they said grotto in 1920. He ended up working on it for 25 years, and every day, all day, using rocks from all over the world. And he's a real visionary. Main structures come out, but it's one of the few remaining grottos. It's list. So we have tourists coming through looking at it. And I was made aware of how important it was historically when a woman came through doing her PhD and had found letters between William Lightner, who built this grotto, and the guy who built West Bend grotto. So there's Kathy Pizzabellis, as I predicted, and Marcia doing an 80s piece called The Deconstruction of Time and Religion on the grotto. And then Kathy later in the bowling alleys and the laundromats with Cedar Rapids. So I became very interested in sort of art made by non-artists and outsider artists. And this is the throne of the third millennium of the Second Coming, which was found in a garage after this gentleman, government worker, died on James Hampton. And the cat in the basket is a woman in the Greyhound bus station that I met. It was at Christmas. And here's one of a man who retired from fishing, and he painted on his boat, "Thank you for all of his good years," and a prayer, and then left the boat there. Another one from Japan. So I just went around collecting images of all these from everywhere I could think to go. And Mexico, of course, became extremely important. And starting with Don Jones and Chuck, we took students there from the 80s on. And lots of shrines and lots of exposure of shrines. This was a photo I found of a performance of Isadore Duncan dancers at our grotto in the 20s. So we reenacted that. We have reenacted on May Day quite often. While I was there, I was in Greece, I learned from these guys who make knockoffs out of sort of heavy tinfoil of Russian or Byzantine icons. And I learned how they did it, and I started making my own. Great goddess ones. And then that transformed into these structures with video, little tiny TVs in them. I'm throwing this in. This seems out of place, doesn't it? But I just want to say something about sources. I mean, a lot of my work is about appropriation, appropriating objects, borrowing objects, finding notes and signs, which everybody in here, I think, has given me something great, many of which are in the show. And sometimes I transfer the text fundamental, sometimes I don't. But this is a kind of thing that I've always been interested in, again, often by untrained artists or untrained sign makers. And at one point, some friends of mine moved into a house in Cedar Rapids, and in a drawer, they found this note that said, "I'm so sorry." It was an old man whose wife died and he was being taken to a home. And it was his home for 50 years. And it said, "I'm so sorry to leave so many weeds. I had a stroke right at the wrong time. I wanted to leave it nice, Jack." And that note I just found so powerful. They found more notes stuffed in other corners, and oftentimes they got much more instructive, like, "I hope you like the birds and the flowers because it hasn't rained and they depend on you." And so the deeper they went for the notes, the more heck they got. But so these are just the beginnings of me using notes on metal. At the same time, when I was living in New York, I began to see after Reagan was president, many of the shelters for mentally ill were opened up, and they ended up on the streets in New York, down in my neighborhood. And homeless situation got really bad. This actually is a homeless person living on the backside of the Coliseum, which is quite a luxury. And this is an older guy that I worked with in London. But this quote I think is really great. Art no longer wants to respond to the excess of commodities and signs, but to a lack of connections. And the work that I've done in community-based or social practice art since then sort of based on that motto. And having taught so many years, I mean, I thought of teaching as a very collaborative experience, and I think teaching made me realize how important it is that everyone has an opportunity to express visually and in ways other than verbally. So I began collecting the notes and putting them all on a wall. And then in 1991, which is well after I started doing this for 10 years, downtown, the old Davenport Museum had the Vix Festival every year. And they invited me to do an installation in one of the window fronts of the old Parker building, and then to judge the installations for the other building. It was just phenomenal opportunity and phenomenal work. And for a month, I worked in different shelters, and we created a whole huge window with a camera looking out so people could see themselves in the notes of the disenfranchised. This is a great one where they remembered a certain place, and it says, I remember this corner of my parents' room in a tin building. It was warm outside. I would sit and pick the threads from the chenille bedspread, which that was a drawing and a memory of mine when I asked other people to think of an insignificant kind of early memory like that. And after I wrote it, I remember thinking, gee, I wonder where my feelings for texture and for textiles comes from and shape. And, I made a lot of connections just based on that one little experience. This is the boardroom full of quite precious items at the YWCA, formerly YWCA in Cedar Rapids. And I came in and took out their precious things and filled them with notes by the homeless and found objects and lunch buckets and so forth. And the floor became kind of a rug of notes. They really liked it. It was a project between the museum and the shelter, which were adjacent from each other, but no one from either place ever went to the other. So there's a whole room with video of a family I found at a yard sale, all of their films from the 50s, and it was this really happy family, which was the antithesis of the notes. And this is a piece done at the Children's Hospital in Iowa City. And I had a sister who died when she was about 5 when I was a kid. And I spent a lot of time there until I was very attached to it. And the Project Art there asked if I wanted to do this project. So I came and worked with terminally ill children every Friday for a year. And then we created what we called Windows 95. That's when it was done and based on the actual program. And it had little, they wrote and drew about looking in or out their window, and then they did videos of themselves looking out. And on the inside, there were little stations where people coming into the hospital lobby could write their own stories of illness and death. And this is in the Des Moines Art Center collection now, but I sort of wish it was still at the hospital because it was really, my favorite part was the opposite of the woman. The woman I quoted earlier here, when I was inside doing some of the wiring, and the guy came in and I heard him say, just a minute, Matt, I want to see what this is. And I was really irritated. And then I explained it was done by terminally ill children, and he got quiet. Yes. This is a much more recent project at University of Illinois because they were having terrible housing problems for disenfranchised. And most of the people in these shelters didn't have shelters anymore because they closed them, and most of them had full-time jobs. So, it's indicative of our time that you can work full-time at minimum wage and not make enough. But this drawing on the right is of a place, a remembered place, which is kind of what they're doing through this project. It was a walk-in book. Here's some of the workshop photographs of them working on the metal and inking it up. And I think if any of you want to participate in this project out there, it's open. Here's some of the drawings. We did a project where we visualized our hearts and then wrote about them. Very interesting, revealing, and really some beautiful drawings. They did it with their eyes closed, and then they would open their eyes and go back into them. This is one about place that was really powerful. This was a homeless adolescent or sheltered adolescent, and her mother had died, and she said, I remember peeking in the room to see if my mother was in bed sleeping, even though I knew she wasn't. And I would put a pillow there and she pretended that her mother was there, and then she would go and sit and talk to her. I did several projects about work, including collaborating with Jane on this is a big walk-in book done at Cornell that was really it was an homage to the everyday low-wage manual worker, service industry worker. It really makes visible and gives a voice to all those people who keep a small town like Cornell going, but who get pretty much ignored. And all of it, we did video interviews, and all the interviews were put into the Iowa Labor Archives, but they became part of videos that were inside this, which Matt created. Butler, and another one that Matt worked on and they worked on, called Work Shift, which was a big collaboration. Invited to do it by a former student of mine who was at Art Institute, who was teaching at the Art Institute of Chicago. And this was a drive-by kind of social landscape with projections and sound. You got on a flatbed truck, and that made sound based on mechanisms. This was the second largest meatpacking plant in the world until it closed, for which time many of the people who worked there lost everything, their pensions and everything, their Enron. Anyway, so you drove around to these kind of 8 different sites, and there were projections, and local alternative high school created dance works for it, and quotes, again, video interviews that went into the Iowa Labor Archives. Similar collected items, that out in the show, you'll see the top of that circular kind of pipe in kind of thing. Someone left that on my front porch. It's one of my examples of like great craft items that people make. They go off the rails. They don't read the directions. They just come up with their own approach to Christmas decorations, whatever. My favorite one is upper left. It's a very delicate piece of wood, and on it are these little tiny figures of deer and Bambi. It's one of them, and then all these soldiers shooting Bambi, and little snowflakes. Another example of glued alphabet soup that I found that was actually by a former student that his mother took. And in the lower left, I think you'll see some of those wax internal body parts that are actually from Fatima in Portugal. And I think Bart's watching it at home, but I have lots of things that have been sent to me by one of my former students who also went to Greece with Dennis Jennings. But he sent me a whole series of letters and journals about different days. And this one was called, they were always dated, the date. And they were just poetic, beautiful things. And so I transferred them to metal, and that's recycled metal from his brother who works at the Amanas. The other is my mother's travel diary, which you'll see another piece of it later, but basically it was where they ate breakfast, dinner. I mean, it was meant to be about what they spent, but it was, breakfast, parties, lunch, McDonald's, afternoon, the Oregon Trail, too foggy. Mount Rushmore was too foggy. They missed every major site, but they got a record of everything they ate. It was always some place that, anybody would eat anywhere. But my best find was the wheelchair accessible hunting blind. If you are in a wheelchair, you can put this backpack on your back like this and wheel yourself out into the woods and set this up, and you can name other things from inside. It was about my size. It was on sale. It's perfect. I got it. And I took it with me. I had to go to Portugal to teach a few years after that, and I really couldn't take much. So I took the wheelchair accessible blind, and then lo and behold, I was living very close to this 5,000-year-old stone circle. And so I did some performances in the blind. I don't know if you can see it. And then I did other performances in the convent where they put up their visiting artists. There were no one in the convent except visiting. And So that was sort of the beginning of this series of containers for the self. And sort of like shelter for the soul. And like the container usually puts you into submissive position. In other words, once you got in it, you couldn't get in another position. This one was called The Architecture of Migration, and it was all writing and material about migration at the time. Also, is now a huge issue, and I could get inside and read from these books. Other people could get inside. And on it, you will see there's a note out there that's part of the scavenger hunt that Don Jones brought me. And it's here in metal. It says, if you are sitting in exit row and you cannot understand this, or you cannot see well enough to follow these instructions, please see a crew member. And it's in 4 languages, but Lejeune explained to me that it's basically said in the other languages that if you don't understand English, but it wasn't very clear in the English version. So it's a great statement. It was in, I believe, Don, was it in the seat pocket of an airline? Yeah. It was on an American passenger jet, I guess. So this is the architecture of fatigue, and this is around 2005 or so, I think. And when she got in, you know, that theory about if you smile, you'll be happier, less depressed. So this was sort of the opposite theory. If you get in here, you feel really fatigued. A lot of my work is about being tired, as you probably noticed. So, and it had all these remedies on the outside for fatigue. And then a lot of my work is metaphorical. So, and then that's David Van Allen's cat Ed, who jumped in my arms during the photo session. David, incidentally, has been my photo and other collaborator for 40-some years. And David, did I thank you? Thank you. So anyway, this kind of leads to the pieces. This is one piece that you will see in the Breakfast on Pluto show. But the containers are open up, and they become sort of. In this case, there's a dialogue between two that's sort of about a discussion of gender stereotypes and social constructions, and a kind of making fun of or a satire of the kind of borders that we create, these very solid borders. And so a lot of what Breakfast on Pluto is about is the fact that there really is no black and white. Things, boundaries, and borders are fluid, and it's a kind of group of layered objects, words, sounds, and every time you see things, you hopefully will see different things or have a different response. I'm really looking for these kind of slippages and entanglements of objects, language, place, through which we maybe try, particularly in the pandemic, we maybe try to relocate our quote-unquote selves. Identity also being a very fluid exercise, but it's about dislocation and dualities and fluidity of border crossings like presence, absence, public, private, male, female, especially, poverty and privilege, colonizer. I want to first mention Pandemic Planet is the name of the corresponding COVID project, which the incredible education department is working on. And this is a very bad little computer sketch of what the building will look like. It's about 12 feet tall, Terry Rasky's building, and Jim's veneer. Designed, for the most part, I told him what I was looking for, and he designed something much better. And the inside will be all dark, and there are little holes in the ceiling, so there'll be little points of light. So it will feel a little like, well, when you go inside, there's only room for one at a time. So it'll either feel like a very contemplative space, or like being outdoors at night with the stars, or like a planetarium, or it'll feel very claustrophobic. I'm not sure which yet. But it should be quite impressive. And the education department is doing that whole thing and the outreach people. And that will be where the Daily Den is now, so you'll be able to see it through that entrance. Now, the show itself, people have asked me a lot. I think everything is open to interpretation, but obviously, particularly if you see Breakfast on Pluto, which is the white one, that was developing in my studio before COVID was developing, or while it was developing. And I just retired from teaching. I was mining my studio, which is kind of a closed system, but I gradually realized that what's happening outside in the culture always affects my work, but it was really affecting it. And I made a little top knot that spins around with little bumps, and that's my can from on the top of it. That's from 5th grade. My can, we wore circle skirts, and we wore these petticoats that made them stick out really wide. And on the top, I made this thing that looks like little budding breasts or something, and all pink, very, very feminized. But then I came in one day and looked at the top of it and went, oh my God, is that COVID? So later I made the opposite, and literally this is a different version of it that you see here than here, because I grew bigger and bigger little protrusions on the end of the spikes, which person informed me or something. No, someone else informed me that it was the Delta variant got longer spikes, which is very great. It's not a pretty story. This is the video, and it's an old video that I did when I was really tired. It's called Fatigue, and it's me rubbing my face, but at the same time, I'm listening to and watching this directive on how to do the foxtrot and Arthur Murray Dance Studio. And so it's like forward one, there two, I'm looking very confused. But it's very, I meant it to be about fatigue, but when you listen to it, it gets very erotic at times. So it's somewhere between the sublime and the frustrating. The candles are from Mexico. I love the idea that you can buy these floral candles and you light them and they melt into a blob, which seems like an apt metaphor for the fleeting nature of beauty. This was really the earliest pieces in the show, because these are probably 5 years old, but the other ones within about the last 2 to 3 years. And these two, again, there's lots one could say about them. The doilies, my grandmother made one of them, and I'm giving away all the treasure. So I'm not saying that there are all these theories about how women are more internal and women in textiles and the doilies. And so it's on the outside is this very kind of deflated phallic condom type shape, sort of guarding, not doing a good job of guarding the place. And so it's a dialogue about cultural ideas about black and white in terms of gender and other things, I think, as well. Just some other details of it. I love this photograph. Andrew took some amazing photographs of the pizza with the lighting. So this boat, Ellen Barth is here, I think. She taught elementary school at St. Pius School for a number of years. And the janitor at their school spent 2 years with his buddy building this matchstick boat, which was a replica of of Columbus's Santa Maria. And it's, they must have smoked a cigarette for every matchstick, unfortunately. But it's amazing, and it lights up. It's everything about it is incredible. And they had it at the school for a while, and Ellen said, "Would you like this boat?" And I said, "Yes." So I've had the boat for a long time, and I've used it before, but I think this is the most appropriate because this piece is really also sort of about immigration, migration. Somebody asked me what the rotating things are in the front, which those are deconstructed neck massagers. So I said, well, why are they there? And I said, I have no idea. I just thought they were great there. But they are sort of sense of being on a boat. The title of this, A Semester at Sea, came from whenever I was walking to school teaching, and there was always this flyer that said, semester at sea. You can be on a boat and take a semester's worth of credits. so forth. So, and every time I saw that, I thought, that's just how I feel. I mean, my legs are wobbly. I have to go back in again. And what do I have to teach today? And so, semester at sea took on another kind of meaning for me. And yards and yards of pink ocean. So, it's about physical and metaphorical migration. And a couple more. Oh, this Matt Butler contributed some very great stories or non-stories about, I did a project between Mount Mercy and Long Island University in New York and Brooklyn, and the students wrote about their background and where they came from. And interestingly enough, it seems that the students at Mount Mercy had much more varied backgrounds than the ones from Brooklyn, just because, I don't know why, I was very curious, but this is one of his notes about how he doesn't really have any great story of his ancestors going across the desert to find each other. And it's, this is a great note, and then there's another one that's really great, and there's the Don Jones original of sitting in the exit row. Again, I must not show that because that's enough. And then this rock-a-bye-bye, I mean, I think of it sort of like a cracked up cradle, the earth cracked apart, but becoming like these individual cradles. And it's kind of like they have like these breasts, and this painting is sort of, it's sort of like many examples, Bob Ross, etc., of paintings you do of utopian places, like the perfect place to be, a volcano in Holland. So it's sort of a reference to that. The little pillows came from all these fabric samples I found in Mount Mercy when I first started teaching in the room I was teaching in. It was an old home ec lab, and they were always 1930s fabrics. They remind me of my grandmother and my aunts, my home heritage. So, but it's kind of like cracked up. It's like we're destroying the earth as we speak. We're losing our great mother. And Pandemic Planet, it looks very womb-like, but Joy in her essay says it also has a very clinical kind of look to it, like it might be some feminized, failed PPE, something you find on another planet, or something left behind from aliens invading us. I mean, inside are these eggs. They're I was going to blow out eggs like you use yours, but I just didn't have the stomach for it. So I put them in a bag, and first I was going to string them on some fishing line, and then I put the needle in one of the plastic eggs. I got plastic eggs, and it wouldn't get stuck. It wouldn't come out. So it's in there, and it really makes me think of vaccinations and genetic testing. I mean, it's a number of things, but none of this is what it really necessarily means. It's just right now what I'm thinking about it. The potato theater is literally like a little theater. And when David Van Allen and I were visiting our former student art in St. Louis, we were at one of those Goodwills where they bring out these big troughs of everything, and you can run and get whatever you want out of it. And so he went to one, I went to another, and then I saw him later, and I think he had the painting of the potato, and I had the potato. I said, "Oh, look what I found! Oh, look what I found!" So we both, I don't know why, I have no idea why. Well, I'll show you in a minute why I think I did this. So that Joey likens it, just uses it to discuss sort of potato famine and other issues about migration, but and the fan. There's also a lot of gender discussion here. And Mr. Grumpy was over my Aunt Dorothy's couch for about 4 decades. And I said, "Is that one of our relatives?" And she said, "No, I got it at a sale. I just liked it." Oh, right. That's comments in their living room for all these years. But, I made sure I got it. It's a drawing. It's actually a original drawing from the original. But the potato, Okay, where did we spend many very long, but to me they're very long, family holidays every Potato Lake. So I have a feeling my affinity for the potato comes from our years at Potato Lake, where my father fished, my mother cooked the fish, my sister fished, and I did drawings of what I would be wearing that fall at school. And last, but a little bit different is invasive species, which is, I think, gloriously in between. You don't know whether it's ominous or positive, whether it's celebratory or whether, it's someone invading us. The fact that it's blowing bubbles out of the back end gives you a hint that maybe, if there's a good time in store for us ahead. But when you look at the painting, which came from my friend Barry Siegel in New York's big, wonderful collection of cat paintings. And the painting is of a tiger or cat, we're never sure. And you can't tell whether he's yawning or he's scared or what. So it's the ambiguity of it that attracted me from it before this piece. So I will end with one of my famous signs. And image of a cat. And I'm sorry, I think I'm going to lose you. And if you have any questions, that's it. Any questions or anything? I can also talk in the gallery.
I have one comment, Jane.
Yeah.
Something that they have talked about, with fondness for objects.
Yes, we
And
do.
it just has occurred to me that, we're talking about reusing all of these objects that we had
Yeah.
and reincorporating them. It almost seems like, in a way, this show is also a memoir. It's like a
very
visual artist
interesting. Yeah.
memoir, not.
Yeah. That's very interesting because Sue Hemmensberger talked about, it looked like someone searching for their voice also. So I think that's very interesting. And I think it's true. I mean, one of the problems with working that way is that you can't necessarily put things you like in there. It doesn't work formally or otherwise. So you're using things and things are happening between the relationships among things, but you don't start out saying, I'm going to use this, I'm going to use that, and I really love this, so I'll use that. I mean, a lot of times, but almost everything I have, I like it. So, oh, sorry. Yeah, that's a great comment, Chris. Chris is one of my great critics. Or no, commenters. Anything else? Well, I hope you're confounded by the whole show. That's the point. The black and the white, there isn't such a thing, really, is there? So I will see you out there if you want to come out. Great, thank you.